The cross-examination of Julie Nagel continued this morning. It came out that on January 29th, when she was leaving, she doesn't recall if there were any streetlights in the area of the flagpole. She said when she saw the blob, it was while she was driving past. And she was asked, well, if you thought it was a body, what would you have done? And she said, I would have called 911. And the defense asked, if you realized it was a body, you would have realized it was important information, right? And she says, that's right, of course. But she didn't realize it until after a conversation. And the defense said, well, isn't it true that that object, that blob, only became 5 feet long yesterday? And the prosecution objects to that. He rephrases, yesterday, 2.5 years later, is the first time you said it was 5 feet. And she says, yes. And I'm going to put up a picture here of the property. Notice the trees and the shadow under the trees. You know, if you've been up all night drinking and you're driving by, could a shadow look like a blob while you're in motion? I mean, at the time she fluffed it off. And there's nothing about this witness that leads me to think that she would simply ignore a person on the ground if that's what she thought. So I wonder if it's a shadow. I wonder if the object was smaller. And because of conversations she's had, because the memory is so old, there are so many things that would taint her recollection. I could see that this business of it being 5 feet long is a tainted memory. It doesn't make sense that she wouldn't at least tell Brian Jr., oh my gosh, I think I saw him, even after the fact. Next up was an expert witness. This was very interesting. Her name was Terry Kuhn. She's in veterinary genetics, and they went through all her credentials. Her lab received 2 swabs, and it's important to note that her lab didn't take the swabs. They showed photos of the packaging. There were 2 swabs in one package, and that caught my attention only because I'm used to just seeing one swab in a package, but maybe they do it differently. She was told that it was a sample from a shirt. Well, it would be surprising if they found DNA on the shirt because it was soaked through, according to paramedics, and that water would destroy or degrade or possibly wash away a good amount of DNA. But even if you don't think you can find something, you look anyway. So good, they sent a swab. They did 2 types of test. In the first test, they need nuclear DNA rather than mitochondrial. So they need that whole DNA. And that was to do the canine test specifically. And in that specific test for canines, they didn't find any canine nuclear DNA. So then they moved on to a different test because they're going to look for other species. And when I say other species, I mean non-human. And in that test, they look for mitochondrial DNA. And the mitochondrial DNA is hardier than the nuclear DNA. They tested both swabs, and on both swabs, they found pig DNA. What? Did John O'Keefe or somebody who touched him eat ribs or pork or bacon? If you had, say, ribs and the meat was kind of mixed with the oils or fats, I wonder if that would help prevent the wetness from washing it away. I don't know. On cross, Jackson brought out that no canine DNA in the swabs doesn't mean there was no DNA, and that's correct. It came out that this expert's lab was never sent cuttings or any source material. She only got the swabs, and she agreed the analysis is only as good as the source material. She was not present when the swabs were collected, so she can't speak to the collection process at all. Where she works, they keep meticulous logs. The chain of custody is really important. There are multiple documents around the chain of custody. So every time somebody does something with a sample, it's logged. who did it, what they did, when they did it, and where it was. For example, taking it to a workstation or back and forth from the evidence storage. Her lab is very careful to avoid contamination, but she has no control over what any other lab does. The point being, if the lab where she got the sample from didn't take care on their end, that's out of her control. The defense asked if the source material had been, say, thrown on the ambulance floor, could that cause contamination? And the witness says, I don't know, we haven't done studies on that sort of thing, right? Basically, she's saying, look, I can't speak to anything that anybody else does. I can tell you what I do. And she says, I can't speak to it. I can't speak to the history of the item. She also said something very interesting, which is bacteria eats away at DNA if it's not packaged properly. And this is one of the reasons why the collection and the storage has to be done in sterile containers using sterile materials. Things like mold, bacteria can eat the DNA. They talked about the process of taking a swab, and it's better if the swab is moistened with sterile water and then air dried before it's packaged. And it should not be packaged in plastic, again, because of that possible bacteria growth and mold growth. I'm going to play you a little clip here. It's entertaining.
Would you put biological material in non-sterile containers?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
We don't have, everything that we use is sterile. All of our tubes that we would use, or once we do a collection, we put it in a tube for the extraction process. Those tubes are autoclaved and they don't have contamination. They are sterile.
You would use a solo cup.
I'm sorry, what?
Objection, Your Honor.
Solo cup.
The objection system.
He asked if DNA is present on an item, but the item is swabbed in a different spot than where the DNA is, you'd miss the DNA, right? Well, the answer is yes, of course. He was trying to make a point about the condition of the source material. And her answer is, look, I don't get to choose the condition of the source material. We learned that blood and dirt can inhibit the results, as can garment dye. And the witness said it's helpful to know if she's getting a sample that came from a source containing blood or dirt or dye. But she wasn't told that when she got these swabs. I'm going to play a clip about the presence of inhibitors because I think this back and forth can explain it better and faster than I can.
Explain how an inhibitor works in your testing.
Excuse me, an inhibitor just actually stops the PCR process from happening. And so therefore you would see no results.
So did you find inhibitors in this sample?
In the nuclear DNA testing, yes.
And was that the qualitative polymerase chain reaction test, qPCR test?
Yes.
And in fact, an inhibitor is pretty much any chemical that's literally going to inhibit the enzyme from helping make the copies.
Correct.
Certain dyes inhibit.
Yes.
And certainly blood inhibits.
Heme from blood, yes.
The defense asked, could pig DNA come from dog treats? And the answer is yes. And interestingly, the prosecution was objecting to this. The defense asked, is dog saliva a good source of DNA? I expected her to say yes, but her answer was, well, it depends. He asked if dog claws were a good source of DNA, and they went back and forth talking about this, and the bottom line is, dog claws are not a good source of DNA. They're made mostly of keratin, and the witness even said not in terms of scratching. So if you have a dog scratch, you're not getting anything from that. She agreed you would need the actual dog claw and then grind it up, and even then, you'd only maybe find DNA. On redirect, the prosecution sort of confirmed. Basically, she can only work with what she gets. The prosecution brought out that this witness explained to the crime lab the process of swabbing. And it's interesting that it's the prosecution who is bringing this out, not the defense. Because why on earth would she need to explain that to a crime lab? The next witness was Ryan Nagel. This is Julie Nagel's brother. He said that night on January 28th, he went to C.F. McCarthy's with his friend and then girlfriend to meet his sister, who we just heard from, Julie. They went there at approximately 7 or 8 p.m. They went in his friend's truck, which was a dark gray F-150. They were there a few hours. Then they went to the hillside. And what was missing from this was, where did Julie go? Did she stay with them? Did she go to the hillside with them? How did she get to Fairview? I mean, that whole thing is missing. He says it's only a 10-minute drive to the hillside. They met another friend there, and they were there for about an hour. He said the reason he went to Fairview was to pick up Julie because she texted him asking for a ride. He said it was 40 minutes between the time she texted and his arrival. He said he noticed a black SUV coming up the hill towards them as they were approaching the intersection. He said his friend, who was driving the truck, flashed his lights to allow the person to turn right onto Fairview. And I think this is an important little detail because what it tells me is that there is a reason, a specific reason for this witness to remember this vehicle and the approach. He said the SUV came up in front of the house. Their truck stopped in front of the driveway and the SUV was in front of them. He says he didn't see anyone get out of the SUV. He said 2 minutes later, Julie comes out through the side door and she crossed the lawn a little on her way to get to his truck. And I find this interesting because this witness, who doesn't care what door she came out of, doesn't understand the importance of which door anybody comes out of, says she comes out of the side door when everybody else is saying, oh, they're coming out the front door, which is not the norm for people coming and going from that house, except on this night all of a sudden. So again, I'm inclined to believe him. She comes out through the side door, across the lawn a little. He says it just started to snow and there was very little accumulation. He said Julie asked them to come in the house and he said no and she decided to stay. And he described this conversation as just like 45 seconds. But in previous testimony, he said it was about 5 minutes, and we'll get to that in a minute. He said he noticed the SUV brake lights were on. It moved up a little further away from him toward the flagpole. He didn't notice any damage to the vehicle. He said, but it was dark out. At the same time, though, he did describe the lights, and he's saying how he knew they were brake lights as opposed to parking lights. So he had a clear view of these lights. He said there were no other tire marks around. He said there was no one outside of the vehicle. In respect to his sister Julie, he said, well, yeah, she had a few, but she wasn't stumbling. Julie had decided to stay. He watched Julie go back into the house. He said the driver of the truck he was in pulled away and the SUV was still there. And he said he saw a person in the vehicle. And the reason he could see is because the dome light was on. And it was a woman with long hair sitting in the driver's seat. He said he did not hear anything from the SUV. So he's not hearing some big fight or argument. The prosecution said to him, when Julie came and talked to you, she opened the door, right? And what went on when your door opened? And he says, the dome light. Well, the implication of this and the message he's trying to send across here is, if the dome light's on, that means the door is open. Except that's not the only reason a dome light would go on. And at no point did the prosecution ask this witness if he saw anyone other than the woman, if he saw the door open, if he saw anybody outside of the vehicle, I mean, he's right there. If this is when the crime occurred, then John's out there at this point already and nobody notices. And again, I go back to the blood drops that are on top of many layers of snow. On cross-examination, Jackson asked, since January 29th, have you been contacted by the Alberts or McCabe's in respect to what you saw? He says no. He was interviewed in February of 2022 by 2 troopers, and he told the troopers who else was in that F-150 with him. So this makes me think this is a setup for the lawyers for later. They've got this information, and now I'm suspicious as to whether or not those other witnesses were also interviewed or interviewed in a timely manner, given the history in this case. In May 2023, this witness was interviewed by someone other than those involved in this case. And the witness said, oh, I think that was the feds. The lawyer says, without saying who interviewed you, were you interviewed? Clearly, they're trying to keep this other proceeding under wraps and out of all this. They talked about his prior testimony. There seemed to be a little bit of a confusion because in his prior testimony, he said there were 5 car lengths or 20 to 50 feet between the truck and the SUV. And the clarification was that, yeah, but that was at the end. So in the beginning, the SUV was right in front of them, and then the SUV pulled up, and at that point was about 5 car lengths away. The defense asked a great question. Did you see a Jeep with a big old snowplow on it? And the answer is no. While watching for Julie to come out the door, his head would have been turned at a 90-degree angle to face the house. So he's no longer paying attention to what's going on with the SUV in front of him. And the implication here is that John could have gotten out of the SUV and walked away and nobody would have seen that. The defense brought out that while he was talking to Julie, Julie had opened the truck door. And so because of the way the truck door is opened out, his view would have been obstructed by that open door. And the defense took him through this whole conversation that he'd had with Julie. And the conversation itself, I think, was not what was important here. What was important here was that it was enough of a conversation to show that that interaction between him and Julie was indeed closer to 5 minutes than it was to 45 seconds. And the witness was focused on Julie the whole time, not the SUV. He was asked again about any damage on the SUV, and again he said, look, it's dark. I'm not looking for that. He never saw the SUV reverse. He did not see any person standing or lying outside of the SUV. The female in the SUV was alone. Next up was Heather Maxson. She was Ryan's girlfriend at the time of the incident. She said she left to go to the bar sometime in the afternoon. She drove to C.F. McCarthy's herself. She doesn't recall how long she was there, and it was just the 3 of them. They went to the hillside. Ricky drove in his truck. She doesn't recall what time they got there. She doesn't recall how long she was there. She doesn't recall when they left. She said neither she nor anyone else was overly intoxicated. You know, one of the things I've noticed through this trial is that people are drinking all afternoon, all night, and then driving and saying, no, nobody was really drunk. But Karen Reed has, it looks like, 1 drink. And the allegation is she was bombed? Okay. Heather said they went to pick Julie up. She'd never been to the Fairview address before. She still doesn't know where the house is. She doesn't even recall the route except that they turned left onto the street. The prosecution was asking her leading questions. And one of the things he led was that she saw an SUV but can't say what color. She said they yielded to the SUV. This is after questioning, and this language compared to her other language throughout her testimony tells me that this particular thing here, that was prepped. She said she saw a male and female in the car. The female was driving, and again with the leading questions, and she says that The people inside the vehicle were Caucasian. I don't know how you see that in the dark, but okay. She said the SUV parked on the street on Fairview. They parked a couple of feet behind it, and she says the SUV didn't move. She saw no one exit the SUV. She said the snow was light, just starting to stick. She saw tire tracks on the road only, so no tire tracks on the front lawn. She saw Julie come out of the house and then saw her go back into the house. And I want to make a remark here. I've realized through the testimony today why it has been so important for everybody to have come out or gone in via the front door, when normally everybody goes into that house through the side door. And the reason is because if someone like these witnesses who are testifying today is watching the side door for somebody to come out or watching somebody go in, then they're not looking at the front door. They're not looking toward the other end of the house, so somebody could walk into the front door and not be seen. Or somebody could walk across the lawn on the other side there and not be seen if the focus was toward that side door. She did see Julie leave the house. She was asked if Julie left footprints, and she says she couldn't see. She said Julie was out there for about 3 to 5 minutes. She said when they left, the SUV was in the same position. It hadn't moved. Lots of contradictory evidence. And you know, this is a good example of people, eyewitnesses, getting on the witness stand and saying something that they think it's true because she has no reason to lie about whether the SUV moved or didn't move. People are mistaken and people misremember, and memory is malleable. She said she noticed the SUV was running and the lights, both interior and exterior, were on. She said when they were leaving, she did see a female in the SUV and she only saw a female. She saw no other person, and she doesn't recall what time they got back to Ryan's house. You know, this suggests when Julie was out there talking to them, and they're all talking and paying attention to Julie, John could have left that SUV. On cross-examination, it comes out that the first interview with law enforcement that this witness had was September 2023, 19 months later. He asked, how close was the truck to the SUV? And she says it was less than 1 car length behind the SUV. She said she saw no damage to the SUV. The defense asked, did you see a Jeep Wrangler with a plow attached to it between the SUV and the truck you were in? And she says no. She noticed nothing extraordinary about the SUV. And she also says, but her focus was on the house. She says the door to the truck wasn't open. She thought the windows were rolled down to talk, but it's possible that the door was open. She was asked if she knew that Karen Reed was the driver, and she says, I don't know. The defense tried to get her to reiterate, so the only person you saw was a female. And she said, okay. On redirect, the prosecution asked, and you didn't see a man walking towards the house? No. The next witness, I'm going to mangle this name, I apologize in advance, Ricky D'Antonio. He met Ryan and Heather at C.F. McCarthy's, got there mid-afternoon, stayed a couple hours, went to the hillside, left the hillside at approximately midnight. He vaguely remembers Heather, the other witness, lying down in the back seat. Well, at what point was she lying down and for how long? Because this is important now. If she's lying down, how does she see the people at the intersection? And nobody ended up asking. He was asked, was the vehicle pulled up in front of the house? He said there was a vehicle, an SUV, pulled up in front of the house, and that vehicle was 10 to 20 yards parked in front of him. He noticed no damage to the SUV, and he did notice it was running. He didn't see anyone get out of the vehicle. He saw no lights on inside the vehicle. He also thinks that Julie came to the passenger side window. The description of the snow is the same as everybody else, which is basically it had just started to snow and there wasn't really accumulation yet. He didn't see tire marks. He saw no footprints in the snow even from Julie. He doesn't believe that the truck door was opened, so why was the dome light in the truck on then? If he's wrong about this, his view was obstructed. If he's right about this, then he just squashed the prosecution's implication that if the dome light is on, it means the door was open. Either way, it's not good for the prosecution. He says he believes the SUV was stationary, but he's guessing because it's hard to remember. And he was basically asked if he saw anyone enter or leave the vehicle. And his answer was, I don't believe so. He was shown a photo and points to the area where the SUV was parked, which was right near the mailbox. On cross-examination, he confirmed he got to Fairview at around midnight. He heard no arguing. He didn't see anybody hit anybody else. He wasn't interviewed by the police the next day. In fact, not any time in 2022. The first time he gave a statement, it was not to the state police or Lally. The first time he ever gave a statement was May 16th, 2023. And it sounds like it was at that other proceeding. And the witness agreed, yeah, over time, your memory is not as good. The state police did not approach this witness at all until September 2023, 21 months later. He said the SUV was already parked when he got there. Well, that means John could have already left the SUV, and that's why nobody saw him get out of the vehicle. He'd already gone. He said the SUV was parked properly. The witness agrees that the exhibit photos that are being shown show snow that was not there at the time that he and the SUV were there. He was asked, did you see a Jeep with a snowplow anywhere? And the answer was no. He said there were no vehicles at all parked on the road besides his truck and SUV. So all these party goers hadn't arrived yet, it sounds like. He knows the SUV was running because the back lights were on. He did not turn his truck off, and so his headlights illuminated the back of the SUV. He didn't notice any damage on it. He did not look inside the SUV. He saw no one standing, sitting, lying outside. The next witness was Allison McCabe, but I'm going to reserve that one for the next video. That's all I've got for you for now. Trust your gut. See you in the comments.